I'm once again joined by Dr. Gerald Horn. Of course, doesn't need much of an introduction. He's the John J. and Rebecca Moore's Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston, author of something like 40 books, hundreds of articles, hundreds, if not thousands of hours of TV, radio, and podcast appearances, and so on. Today, we're going to talk about Haiti, the current situation in Haiti, its revolution, of course, and Dr. Horn's book on Haiti, Confronting Black Jacobins, the United States, Haitian Revolution, and the Origins of the Dominican Republic, published in 2015 by Monthly Review Press. And I'll, of course, put a link in the description box below. Dr. Horn, good morning. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me once again.
Thank you for inviting me.
So before we dive into your book, I was hoping you could talk to us just a little bit about the current situation in Haiti. What's the political situation like down there? What are its causes, its consequences? Could you just fill us in a little bit?
Well, as I'm sure your audience recalls, about a year or so ago, the then leader was assassinated in his bed. Apparently, the hitmen, at least some of them, were of Colombian ancestry, although apparently they had conspired with certain Haitian security officials. So obviously, when a high level official was killed in his bed and his wife is wounded, there had to be some sort of internal collapse. Since that time, Ariel Henry has been heading the Haitian government in the midst of stiff opposition from civil society groups. He has not been able to get a handle on the internal security question in Haiti, raising issues as to whether or not certain so-called gangs are filling the vacuum that has been evacuated by the weakness and debilities of government. That has led to a call from forces, external forces, that could very well be considered to be the culprits, speaking of US imperialism and their comrade in arms in Ottawa, Canada, for an international intervention into Haiti, which has been resisted, not least by groups in the United States. I'm thinking of Black Alliance for Peace, for example, which in a remarkable display contacted the missions of Russia and China at the United Nations to get them to intercede to prevent a Security Council resolution emerging that would authorize this international intervention. That maneuver by BAP was breathtaking and obviously opens up new vistas for future and further collaboration in the future. I think that one of the reasons why there was so much stiff opposition to international intervention was because of the unpleasant memories of the most recent international intervention in Haiti, speaking of what transpired some years ago, where the United Nations forces, the so-called Blue Helmets, left in their wake a kind of devastation involving deaths because of unsanitary practices, involving a sexual assault and sexual harassment of Haitian women, etc. Unfortunately, that happened during the first tenure of then Brazilian President Lula da Silva, who fortunately is coming back to office on January 1st, 2023. And I think that because of that previous ghastly intervention, there has been resistance to a replay. So as we speak, that's the state of play on the island. That is to say, a stiffening opposition by civil society groups, a government led by Ariel Henry that is increasingly unpopular, and international forces led by Washington and Ottawa that are thirsting and salivating to intervene once again.
Yeah, you anticipated my follow-up, which was going to ask you. I was going to ask you about Lula's previous tenure as president of Brazil and the so-called stabilization mission, um, and his peacekeeping forces that he deployed to Haiti in, I think, 2004. Well, since you anticipated my question, um, I will skip over that and I will actually ask you to back up just a little more into the era of Aristide. Can you talk a little bit about this external intervention, the presidency of Aristide and his eventual ousting, and how that kind of laid the framework for what we're seeing today?
Well, first of all, let me just add a footnote to the Brazilian intervention approximately 15 or so odd years ago. One perhaps possible positive aspect of that unfortunate intervention was the fact that it helped to accelerate a movement of Haitians to Brazil. There's a considerable Haitian community in Brazil right now, and that then allows that Haitian community to send remittances back to their homeland to keep families afloat, to influence the political situation on one of the most in one of the most important countries on planet Earth. Speaking of Brazil, with a top 10 population and a top 10 economy as well. So even a cloud has a silver lining, if you like. Now, with regard to Mr. Aristide, you may recall that he was elected and his movement, the Lavalas movement, was a popular movement. The problem was that there were security forces backed by malign influences who were hotly opposed to his tenure. And so what happens, this is about 2 decades ago or so, is that as these security forces are plotting to oust him from power, somehow Mr. Aristide, at the behest of the United States of America, is placed on a plane and sent into exile. First, he was sent into Central Africa, then he winds up in South Africa. Once again, a positive aspect of that otherwise a tragic episode was that it rekindled South African interest in Haitian affairs, including then President Thabo Mbeki, if I'm not mistaken, coming to Haiti, certainly speaking on Haiti in a remarkable address, linking the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804, to the ultimate liberation of Africans in this hemisphere from enslavement and Africans on the continent from colonialism. Mr. Aristide is still viewed by many as a popular unifying force, although his return to power would be viewed with horror in Washington and Ottawa and in Paris. And sadly enough, Haiti does not necessarily get the final say on who gets to lead their country.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for filling us in on the past couple decades, past few decades of Haitian history, and the entanglement with these external forces in Canada, France, and the United States, of course. If we could turn to your book now, well, actually, by way of C.L.R. James's book, The Black Jacobins, probably the most recognizable text on the revolution, and certainly a cornerstone of scholarship on Haiti in the 20th century. I was curious how your book, Confronting Black Jacobins, might be in conversation with James's Chronicle of the Revolution. And I'm curious what kind of intervention you are making into the literature on Haiti and its revolution more generally.
Well, in the next few weeks, today is November 5th, 2022, I'll publish a review essay on a new biography of C.L.R. James in The Nation, the New York-based weekly, that will give a fuller exploration and excavation in response to your question. Let me say at this point that James's book is of profound importance. I think it's of a profound importance in part because of the absence of analysis of this event of world historic importance, speaking of the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804, in the Caribbean, with a victory of what in The Nation I call unpaid workers. And I use that term because I'm trying to link the Haitian Revolution and its triumph to the subsequent victories of the working class globally and transnationally, which makes all the more curious what I mentioned in the review essay, which is that certain figures who we respect were rather quiet in a baffling sort of way about the importance of the Haitian Revolution. Tom Paine, an icon of the US left and a tribune for 1776, a tribune for the French Revolution as well, had little or nothing to say about the Haitian Revolution, even though it transpires during his lifetime and when he is still a person who's commenting quite prolifically on global affairs. Even Karl Marx, who we, of course, respect because of his centering of the working class and its struggle against capital, had little to say about this startling victory of unpaid workers. And I think that with regard to James's book, that in this essay in The Nation, I tried to put James in the context of how and why he, at least for a while, became a Trotskyite. Recall that Leon Trotsky, the Ukrainian-born Soviet leader of the Russian Revolution, had a subsequent falling out, you can say, either with the subsequent leader of the Soviet Union, speaking of Stalin, or you can say with the Central Committee of the Soviet Communist Party. Whatever the case, Trotsky wrote this book, History of the Russian Revolution, which stirred James to try to do the same thing about the Haitian Revolution. One of the things that James was trying to accomplish in his book was to center the oppressed as the active agents in their own history, as opposed to previous histories when talking about the abolition of slavery, put much more emphasis on what was going on in the metropole with regard to Wilberforce and other abolitionist figures who, of course, deserve respect. But at the end of the day, as James tries to show, it was the unpaid working class that liberated themselves and, to a certain degree, liberated a good deal of humanity. Now, as I say in this essay, what happens is that Trotsky develops this idea of permanent revolution, that is to say, in contrast to the leadership of the Soviet Communist Party, he expressed doubt, shall we say, as to whether or not you could build socialism in one country. And what I tried to suggest in this review essay is that James's experience writing about the Haitian Revolution and how it was encircled, which helped to debilitate the prospects and chances of the success of that revolutionary process that that influenced the way he viewed the Soviet Union. That is to say that in order for the Haitian Revolution to thrive, James felt that there had to be abolition generally. In fact, that was the position of the Haitian leadership, which after the triumph of the revolution, 1804, was quite active in stirring the revolts of the enslaved in the Caribbean. Recall the alliance with Bolivar in South America. Now, I have some questions about some of James's other points, which I won't rehearse here because it would lead us astray in terms of discussing Haiti. But that's part of what I say in this essay in terms of the Haitian Revolution. And I should also say that James, of course, had studied the French language, the language of Robespierre, in his native Trinidad and Tobago, and that when he traveled to France in 1933, 1934 to do original research for a book that emerges in about 1938, that at that particular moment, Trotsky himself was in France. Interestingly enough, even though the forces aligned with Trotsky have had a difficult road to hoe in the United States of America, that was not the case in France, for example. Jean-Luc Mélenchon, for example, who ran a credible race for the Élysée Palace just months ago against President Macron, comes from a Trotskyist background. Lionel Jospin, who ran a similar credible race for the Élysée in the 1990s, has a similar orientation. And so one of the things I'm trying to do in this essay, of course, is to put all of this in context. Not only the Haitian Revolution and C.L.R. James's book on SAME, his Trotskyist background. Of course, he breaks with Trotskyists subsequently, and they have many unkind and unpleasant things to say about one another, shall we say, which I also note in this review essay. But also trying to put in context the rifts that have marred the working class movement over the decades, which is more inopportune than ever, given the fact that the hot breath of fascism is breathing down our necks as we speak. And given that ghoulish prospect, it may be time to try to revisit old antagonisms, to try to reassess old antagonisms. And I think that that would be the necessary tribute that we would pay to the people of Haiti, who have suffered so grievously over the centuries and over the decades, and have contributed so much. And the least that we can seek to do in the metropole is to try to re-examine past rifts and try to forge a legitimate anti-fascist unity, which may be our saving grace.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that kind of prelude or that preface to your forthcoming review essay, which once it's published, I will go ahead and link to this interview when it's up on YouTube. Let's go ahead and go into the revolution now. Step back into the late 18th century. You write in your book that at no time in American history have foreign affairs influenced domestic issues more than in the 1790s. The revolution, of course, arriving in 1791. You also write that the revolution ignited a general crisis in the entire slave system, causing panic that seemed to preoccupy the United States for pretty much the entirety of the 19th century, at least up through the Civil War. Can you give us an overview of the revolution and its world historical impact? What precipitated the revolution? How did it unfold? And how were subsequently US and Haitian relations shaped as a result?
Well, your audience needs to realize that this small island in the Caribbean, uh, with approximately 500,000 unpaid workers, may have been the most profitable colony on planet Earth at that time, at a time when colonialism was the order of the day. This had a lot to do with the French enslavers and colonizers who paid scant attention to the declining life chances of the enslaved population. That is to say, in a certain sense, the enslaved were worked to death, and then more Africans were dragged across the Atlantic, for example, from today's Benin, amongst other West African nations. And you also need to realize that with regard to what becomes Haiti, that it is a history that's intersected with the emerging history of what becomes the United States of America. What I mean is that in the middle of the 18th century, the settlers and colonizers in North America, led by George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and the other enslavers, were straining at the leash of British colonialism for a number of reasons. Recall that 1757 to 1763, you had this war between Britain and France, which in many ways was a global conflict, but for our purposes, it led to the ouster of France from Canada, leaving in its wake a lingering national question, speaking of the predominantly French-speaking citizenry of Quebec today. So what happens, of course, is that it's a triumph for London, but it's a poison chalice because London, as I'm sure many of your audience realizes, then begins to try to raise taxes to pay for the military victory, raise taxes on the settlers. The settlers in North America object. The settlers are also upset because London wants to try to establish a kind of entente with the indigenous south of the Canadian border. And there's the Royal Proclamation of 1762, 1763, which seeks to restrain real estate speculators like George Washington, leading forays to seize Native American land. That does not go down very well with George Washington and company. And then in 1772, you have Somerset's case, where enslavement is abolished in England itself, which raises questions as to whether the decision will leapfrog the Atlantic and assume applicability in North America, jeopardizing the vast fortunes of the murderers row that become founding fathers. Speaking of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Patrick Henry, et al. So what happens is that, for various reasons adduced a moment or two ago, the settlers revolt. They're assisted by France. It's fair to say that the settlers would not have prevailed against London without external assistance from France. I could digress into how US imperialism has objected subsequently to the Angolans in the 1970s accepting external assistance from Cuban troops. And I could go on with that list, but I won't go down that particular road. But I will say that France, in order to subsidize George Washington and company, they too tried to raise taxes on their population. They too tried to squeeze their population. They too tried to squeeze even more profits out of what becomes Haiti. And that leads to a concurrent revolutionary process in both France and in the Caribbean. There is this symbiosis between the French Revolution and the Haitian Revolution, which is one of the reasons why James calls his book Black Jacobins, and goes to the Jacobins are of course, at the cutting edge of the French Revolutionary process, and the Black Jacobins are at the cutting edge of the abolitionist process. So as early as the 1790s, you see movements in France as the revolutionary process is unfolding to abolish slavery. This is remarkable in historic retrospect, but it complicates the situation on the island itself because many of the slaveholders do not want to see their most valuable property, that is to say, the property of enslaved Africans, nullified. It also causes a certain amount of anxiety in North America. I begin the book, Confronting Black Jacobins, referring to how George Washington himself was petrified by the idea of this unrest unfolding in the Caribbean and what it portended for the slaveholders' republic that he then led. But in any case, what happens is that under the adroit leadership of Toussaint Louverture, the Haitians triumph. They wind up defeating major European armies of eventually France, Spain, Britain, to name just a few, because your audience may know that there is a kind of fork in the road that the French Revolutionary process encounters, leading to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, who I think it's fair to say is not in the tradition of the Jacobins. In fact, he tries to execute a counter-revolution in both France and in Haiti, sending his troops across the Atlantic. They are able to ensnare Toussaint, who is arrested, bound up, and sent back to Europe, where he dies. But in his dying breaths, he pledges that his defeat personally will not necessarily mean a defeat for the revolutionary process. And he, I think it's fair to say, has the gift of prophecy in that regard. And so by January 1st, 1804, you have the triumph of the revolutionary process, the triumph of the Haitian Revolution, which, as noted a moment or two ago, emerges on the world stage encircled by slave-owning powers. You mentioned, I believe, the fact that the revolutionary government was forced to pay reparations to the enslavers, not reparations from France for the centuries of labor, the decades of labor that was unpaid, but reparations to the enslavers, which handicaps the revolutionary government coming out of the chute and helps to handicap it going forward. But what happens is that with the triumph of the Haitian Revolution, we see that the far-sighted, particularly the far-sighted abolitionists, recognize that the jig is up with regard to enslavement. You see that in London in particular, London, at least the far-sighted in London, recognize that the cash cows that were Jamaica and Barbados in particular are in grave jeopardy because of the triumph of the Haitian Revolution. After all, in August 1791, the man given credit for lighting the fuse, speaking of Boukman or Bookman, he might have been literate, was reportedly of Jamaican ancestry. Just like there is a linkage between Cuba and Puerto Rico, two wings of the same bird, you could say the same for Haiti and Jamaica, these close neighbors. And so you see a jolt of adrenaline into the mainstream, into the bloodstream of British abolitionism. It accelerates as a result because there was a dire prospect of not only enslavers and colonizers and settlers in Jamaica, Barbados, etc., losing their lives as a result of a revolt of the enslaved, but perhaps more importantly, losing profits as a result of a revolt of the enslaved. And so, with abolition on the fast track, you see that Britain moves to abolish slavery in its worldwide possessions circa 1833, 1834, a direct outgrowth of the Haitian Revolution. And you see, contrastingly, that the enslavers in the United States dig in their heels, reminding one of Alabama Governor George Wallace at the schoolhouse door in the early 1960s, seeking to block desegregation of education in that particular state, saying never, never, never. And that was the veritable cry from the enslaving class in North America as well. But what they were not able to contain was the gathering de facto alliance between London abolitionists and revolutionary Haiti, which puts pressure on the United States. It puts pressure on the United States in so many ways. I mean, for example, you may know that in my most recent book on Texas, the counter-revolution of 1836, when Texas secedes from Mexico in 1836, not unlike what had happened 60 years earlier, when what is now the United States seceded from London, that the lust for land and enslaved unpaid workers to work that land was the locomotive for that process. And Texas is an independent state between 1836 and 1845, but ultimately it could not withstand the pressure from abolitionist London and revolutionary Haiti. Haiti, for example, was plotting to make sure that slavery was abolished in Cuba, for example. There was a perception in the minds of enslavers like Sam Houston and Stephen F. Austin in Texas that they were going to plot, speaking of Haiti and London, to establish what was called a Haiti in Texas, which, as a person who lived in Texas, is something retrospectively I would have welcomed. But in any case, Texas crawls into the Union, where it has been ever since in 1845, and it helps to drag the United States even further to the right when it crawls into the Union, helping to spark and instigate the U.S. Civil War. But of course, it can all, in a sense, be traced back to those unpaid workers in the Caribbean who had the gumption and the courage and the fortitude to rebel against horrific working conditions, not to mention unpaid labor, and to cast out the bosses and try to control their own destiny.
Yeah, we talked about that Texas connection last time we spoke, which I found really interesting, especially how in that work you pepper in the influence of Haiti and that de facto alliance between Haiti, London, and Mexico that you mentioned. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, well, you talked about Napoleon and the re-enslavement campaign, I think 1803 in Haiti. And that event eventually lead to the Louisiana Purchase, which of course was very consequential in that westward expansion of slavery and that right-wing shift that you discuss, that you just discussed. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of rebound or that boomerang effect of the Louisiana Purchase after the victory in Haiti?
Well, re-enslavement is a phrase that I believe has disappeared from our ordinary lexicon. Let us hope that it does not come roaring back, but certainly re-enslavement was on many lips in the 19th century, not least in the Caribbean. Because keep in mind that Napoleon's attempt to re-enslave the revolutionaries in what becomes Haiti, and what is Haiti, was not altogether unsuccessful, because you have a re-enslavement that takes place to a degree in Guadeloupe and Martinique, the other French Caribbean possessions. That is to say, slavery was abolished, and then it came roaring back and wasn't abolished again until the 1840s, for example. And I think that from a social science point of view, that should remind us that certain victories that we take for granted as being etched in stone are not necessarily permanent. That we can see the reversal of the tides of history. And what happens is that when Paris is defeated in Haiti, what becomes Haiti, the decision is made to liquidate whatever rights they have with regard to the what's called the Louisiana Purchase. That is to say, this vast territory stretching from the Canadian border down to New Orleans, and including from the Mississippi River and thereabouts heading west, that it should be sold for a pittance to the United States of America. Now, of course, I'm sure that you and your audience recognize that this was Native American land in the final analysis, which is why I used the term whatever rights France possessed to that land, and were transferred to the United States of America, which then helps to increase the landmass of the infant United States of America. It helps to engender a further conflict with Native Americans, who find that they have a new purported landlord in the form of the United States of America. That ultimately it helps to instigate the so-called Trail of Tears, that is to say, forcing the indigenous population of the southeast quadrant of North America, speaking of the Cherokees, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Creeks, for example, to move westward, or on a forced march westward, I should say, to what is called Indian Territory, today's Oklahoma. This is part of this ethnic cleansing that has characterized the early history of the United States of America. But this establishment of Indian Territory, in a sense, as I say in my book on Texas, it puts a problem, quote unquote, that the United States had endured. Speaking of the problem of rambunctious Native Americans in Georgia, Alabama, Carolinas, etc., making that a problem of independent Texas, putting them on the northern border of Texas. So it simultaneously puts pressure on Texas, leaving Texas few alternatives but to run up the white flag and enter the United States of America. That was the ultimate result. And so once again, we see that Haiti is a kind of figure behind the curtain, which is influencing and shaping the history of North America and ultimately the history of the United States of America. And unfortunately, the oppressing class in the United States, they have long memories. And I think that's one of the reasons why Haiti is still being penalized and pulverized to this very day.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for diving into that, those intersections between Texas and Haiti and the annexation in the 40s. Certainly a crucial history um, with regard to the makeup of this nation and the consequences that we're seeing today politically. Um, I, let's talk a little bit more about the aftermath of the revolution, Haitian Revolution. There was a number of uprisings in the American South and in the Caribbean, of course, during and after the revolution. There was genuine fears of a second Haitian revolution. You already alluded to in Texas, the idea that Texas would be turned into a kind of Haiti, the horrors of Saint Domingue, and so forth. And those fears were probably not irrational. There's a whole host of uprisings that you list in your book. You don't list them, you of course explicate them. 1795 New Orleans, 1800 Virginia, 1811 Martinique, Gabriel's Revolt, Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, of course, John Brown, and others. And there's a fascinating detail that you recount in a footnote in your book about this mysterious character who called himself Nero. Can you talk about these figures and these uprisings a bit and how they may have been either connected indirectly or directly to the Haitian Revolution?
Well, as noted, the Haitian Revolution instigated instability in the entire system of enslavement, just as the rise of socialist projects in the 20th century helped to shape capitalism, moving capitalism, particularly in Canada and the Scandinavian countries, into a kind of social democracy, whereby the control of the means of production remained firmly in the hands of the capitalist class. But because of the struggle of unions and working class parties, favorable conditions were created for the extraction of social welfare benefits. For example, the single payer healthcare system that Canadians now enjoy. And to a certain extent, that principle applies in the United States. That is to say, the New Deal reforms of the 1930s are obviously connected, as historians have shown, to the kind of concern about the apparent spread of socialist projects, leading to Social Security, amongst other project unemployment compensation, for example. And so, likewise, with regard to the Haitian Revolution, in the early stages before abolition, it leads to this process in the Caribbean under London. It's called amelioration. That is to say, trying to improve the working conditions of the unpaid working class. But that is a sop that fools few and leads inexorably, it seems to me, to abolition of slavery. And likewise, the enslaved are inspired by the Haitian Revolution. That is to say, when they see in North America, for example, that due south in the Caribbean, the unpaid working class kicks out the bosses and the enslavers. This helps to inspire Gabriel's Revolt, circa 1800 in Virginia, for example. The revolt in Louisiana, circa 1811. This is a few years, recall, after the United States claims that territory as a result of the French evacuation, which we just made reference to. In fact, what happens is that with the triumph of the Haitian Revolution, you see that the enslavers and their most valuable property oftentimes migrate en masse to New Orleans, to Louisiana, and these enslaved workers are migrating with images fresh in their mind of their defeating the enslavers in the Caribbean. Barbados, for example, and of course, there's a lot of evidence in this regard because after Barbados, circa 1815, 1816, a major slave revolt there, the shaken colonizers take testimonies from the enslaved. And so there is quite a bit of detail with regard to how the enslaved were inspired by the Haitian Revolution, and in fact, may have been assisted by Haitian revolutionaries. Denmark Vesey, about 200 years ago in Charleston, South Carolina, a man who had sailed in and out of the Caribbean as a merchant seaman, and a man whose plot purportedly involved escaping en masse, along with others, of course, to the Caribbean. With regard to Nat Turner's slave revolt circa 1831 in Virginia, once again, we see that there are allegations that some of the men and women and folk led by Nat Turner actually had roots in the Caribbean, were part of that wave moving northward post 1804 into North America, not only into New Orleans, as mentioned, but into Savannah, into Charleston, into Norfolk, and ultimately, of course, trickling into Southampton, Virginia. So there is a remarkable connection between unrest and instability in slavery. And in fact, if you look at the records with regard to nations as far south as Argentina, for example, which too endured slavery, you'll find that enslavers there too were quite fearful about the after effects of the Haitian Revolution. And certainly that's the case in Brazil, the leading slave empire along with the United States of America, not to mention neighboring Cuba, which historically has had a close association with revolutionary Haiti.
Great. Yeah, thanks for recounting those intersections, which often get forgotten or overlooked. The links between Nat Turner's revolt, well, the possible links that you recount in your book. There's another crucial aspect to your book that I think is one of the most innovative, I guess, ideas behind your book, and that's the history of the Dominican Republic.
Mm-hmm.
You write that the rise of the Dominican Republic was a coup for the United States and a blow against Haiti. Can you walk us through this history of the Dominican Republic, United States interests in the Dominican Republic, the motivations behind the inauguration of the independent country of the Dominican Republic, and kind of give us that complex history that we don't often get?
Well, if you look at your map, you'll see that there's an island oftentimes referred to as Hispaniola. And this relatively small island contains two countries, Haiti and the Dominican Republic. In the early stages of the Haitian revolutionary process, you see that the revolutionaries are able to take over the entire island. The DR, as can be easily inferred, had been a Spanish colonial possession. But what happens, and what I describe as one of the early victories of U.S. covert action, is that the United States helps to stir a revolt on the what could be called the Dominican side of the island, and it leads to the secession of the Dominican Republic from Haitian rule in the 1840s. And so you have this very unique history of the DR coming to independence against a Black-controlled island, a Black-controlled regime, speaking of Haiti, which in turn has influenced, and one might even say infected, Dominican culture subsequently. When I talk about this in classes, I oftentimes bring up an image of the retired baseball slugger Sammy Sosa, who, of course, was of Dominican origin. And while he was playing with the Texas Rangers and the Chicago White Sox, etc., he was quite melanin rich. But after retiring, he's able somehow to drain the melanin from his face. And the draining of the melanin from his face to become a light-skinned person is emblematic of a very tangled history of what happens when a nation comes to independence in a struggle against a Black-controlled island. And you have this confluence of class and color, so to speak. And Dominican Republic also has the unfortunate and dubious distinction of being a nation that, after it becomes independent, actually tries to entice and encourage Spain to come back and recolonize the Dominican Republic. It would be as if Angola, after fighting for independence in 1975 and triumphing, and tells the Portuguese to come back subsequently to take control. And of course, once again, this was tied to the hysterical fear of Haiti. And this conflict between the Dominican and Haiti continues to this day. There's an ongoing project in the Dominican to build a wall to keep out Haitians. You've had leaders of the DR who've tried to attain the highest office in the land, to become president and positions thereunder, who have had their campaigns destabilized because they're dark-skinned and therefore they're said to be Haitians, which means that they're outsiders, etc. And just as a footnote, I remain a fan of baseball, and we all know about the success of Dominican baseball players in the North American leagues, and oftentimes watch carefully the surnames of the. Are you a baseball fan, by the way?
Yeah, I grew up with baseball. Oh yeah.
I'm trying to think. I was just trying to think. Number 29 for the Texas Rangers, the third baseman, Dominican. I can't think of his name.
I could look it up real quick for us.
Yeah, I could probably, because he was one of my favorite players because he did not have a Spanish surname. So always, even though I didn't know it, I imputed Haitian origins to him. Actually, let me look it up too.
Adrian
Yeah, that's it.
Beltre.
Yeah, that's right. That's it.
Yeah.
Adrian Beltre. Exactly. That's the guy. He used to always go down on one knee after he hit a home run. You remember that?
I do, yeah.
So, in any case, that's a digression. The complex relations between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, as I said, has weakened both. It helped to instigate U.S. military interventions on both sides of the island in the early decades of the 20th century. The intervention in Haiti lasting from 1915 to about 1934. And the U.S. influence leads to the rise of the Dominican dictator Trujillo, who not only rules for decades, but also is implicated in a massacre, a bloody massacre of Haitians in the 1930s. And that kind of poisoned relationship has done few favors for both sides of the island. And at some point, I am sure, in the 21st century, just in the last few days, you saw President Petro of Colombia and President Maduro of Venezuela come together in Caracas under the banner that we are one people, that oftentimes have been manipulated against each other. For example, in the pre-existing regime of President Duque, for example. I'm sure that at some point in the 21st century, you will see Haitian and Dominican leaders come together under the banner that we are one people and we should not be manipulated one against another.
Well, yeah, that's certainly a hopeful appraisal. I mean, that would be a wonderful thing to see in the 21st century. And speaking of the 21st century, I know that we're probably out of time here, so perhaps this talk about Haiti can continue in a part 2, because there's a lot to talk about in the 21st century, which you just made mention of. You kind of brought us to the 1930s. There's a major event that happens in Haiti and from 1915 to 1930. And I know we probably don't have time to talk about it today, but I would like to eventually talk about those Civil War years leading up to the reoccupation of Haiti in the 1915 to 1934. We can maybe schedule another time to meet and talk about that. One quick question, you mentioned baseball. I heard somewhere, maybe it was recently even, that you had considered writing a book about baseball.
Oh yeah.
And have any plans to complete such a book?
You know, I haven't gone there as of yet. It's a question of coming up with the right topic, basically, because for the longest time I've been in touch with the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York, which is not only a Hall of Fame, but is also a major archive for the sport. And so it's just a matter of blocking out some time to parachute into Cooperstown and spend time going through records, going through books, etc., which presupposes that I have a topic in mind, which as of now I do not.
Okay, well, we'll just put that on our radar then, and keep our fingers crossed.
Mm.
Well, anyway, Dr. Horn, thank you so much for coming to talk with me again. Look forward to our next conversation, which I think is going to be on the topic of fascism and Lawrence Dennis and your other book, The Color of Fascism. And we have a couple other interviews planned for the next few months, having to do with a couple other of your books. So look forward to that. Thank you again, Dr. Horn. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
On Friday, November 11th, 2022, Dr. Horn will be in conversation with Cynthia Miller Idris and Jason Stanley on the topic of U.S. fascism, its origins, patterns, and continuities. This is a panel put together by the April Institute. Again, that's Friday, November 11th, from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific time. Mountain Standard Time. I'll put a link in the description, of course, that you can access and sign up for that event. And then the following Sunday, November 13th at 3 p.m. Pacific time, Dr. Horn will be on KPFK to discuss his book on Texas, the Counter-Revolution of 1836, Texas Slavery and Jim Crow and the Roots of U.S. Fascism. You can get a ticket to that event in the link in the description.